Well, let's bring in Angus Moore, economist at REA Group. Angus, thanks for your time today. It looks like the auction market is starting to bounce back after a pretty quiet election weekend.
Yeah, that's right, and thanks for having me, Ed. Certainly we saw a quieter weekend last weekend with the election, and things look like they're picking up again this weekend. Might be a bit of catch up for people that delayed the auction last weekend and are holding it this week instead. That's really consistent with what we've been seeing so far this year. It has been quite busy. If we look at the pace of sales, we're tracking a little bit behind where we were last year, but not a lot. Here in Sydney, it's a little bit slower, not a lot, but a little bit. WA, SA running ahead, and around the rest of the country, we're tracking sort of broadly in line in terms of sales. But if we're looking at selling conditions kind of more broadly, we are starting to see probably a little bit of a cooling off over the last month or so. Price growth has clearly slowed. We saw in April prices were basically flat, and with the Reserve Bank looks set to raise interest rates quite a few times this year, I think it's fair to say we'll probably see prices decline a bit over the next few months, and we're starting to see measures of buyer demand come off as a result.
Yeah, we also now have that change of government, which means Labor's housing policies are likely to be approved by Parliament. Can you just talk us through the Help to Buy policy and what impact that might have on Australia's property market?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly the big news this week was the election that kind of dominated everything else. In terms of its impacts for housing, really the key one was the government's pre-election announcement of the Help to Buy scheme. So this is what's called a shared equity scheme, and as might be clear from the name, this is where the government shares in the equity in your home. So basically they buy 30% if it's an existing dwelling or up to 40% if it's a new home. And that lets you buy with a deposit of just 2%. So that obviously helps people get into the market sooner. In terms of its impacts, there are a lot of constraints on eligibility for the program. So it's means tested, meaning you have to earn under 90K as an individual or under 120K as a household. That's relatively binding. Median income in Australia is, average household income in Australia is something like 120K, and median's a bit under that, more like 90. So, many people will still be eligible under that means test, but many won't. There's also price caps, meaning that even median price dwellings in around the country won't be eligible. But again, those won't be that binding necessarily, particularly for first home buyers who tend to buy cheaper properties. What will be quite binding is that there is only 10,000 places for the scheme, and that's relatively small compared to the number of first home buyers, which is, it was 100 or more than 150,000 last year, though last year was very busy. It's, more like 100, 110 in a typical year. So as a result, I don't think we'll see massive impacts on the broader market as a result. It's not that many newly empowered buyers, but it is important to note it is a very generous scheme. The government's 30% your landlord because they own 30% your house, but they don't charge you any rent on that 30%. Now, you're responsible for all the maintenance and rates, but the rent clearly outweighs that. So it is quite generous for those that get it. But the broader impacts, given those eligibility constraints, I think will be reasonably small.
And Angus, we've only got a few seconds left, but how many basis points do you think the RBA will lift the cash rate next month?
It's a great question. Look, I don't have a strong view. I think certainly they will and should raise interest rates by at least 25. I think what's more important than how much they move next month is kind of how quickly they're going to raise over the rest of the year. And I think we are going to see quite a few rate rises to get inflation under control.
Thank you, Angus Moore from REA Group. Thanks so much for your time.